Have you ever wondered why sometimes you avoid a conversation, and you don't even know why? Or why, right before a big opportunity, you hesitate, you freeze, as if there's some invisible wall holding you back? I've met so many people, and honestly, I've been there myself, who've experienced that exact feeling. And most of the time, the reason isn't in the present moment. It comes from something quiet, hidden deep inside the mind, repressed fear. I want you to imagine this. Inside your mind, there's a little room with no windows, always locked. Every time you go through something too painful, too heavy to face, your brain, like a bodyguard, shoves it into that room, locks the door, and pretends it's gone. On the surface, you keep living, you smile, you work, you love, you laugh, but that room, it never disappears, and sooner or later, whatever's been locked away will find a way to leak out. Repressed fear doesn't look like the fears you usually think of. It doesn't make you scream or run. Instead, it whispers. It hides in those pauses between your words. It shows up in the way you avoid a subject without realizing it. Or in that vague tension in your body you can't explain. And those quiet fears? They're the ones with the most power to shape your life. I've worked with people in their 20s, 30s, even their 50s, smart, talented, full of potential. But when we really sat down and talked, many admitted a truth. Their biggest life decisions weren't driven by dreams or goals, but by a fear they couldn't name. They avoided love because they feared being abandoned. They put off their dreams because they feared failing. They threw themselves into work, staying endlessly busy, not out of passion, but because silence felt unbearable. Silence would let the old memories come back. Do you see yourself in that? Here's the interesting part. Science shows that repressed fear doesn't just vanish. Neuroscience tells us that when you suppress a strong emotion, the amygdala, the part of your brain that processes fear, still records it. In other words, your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. That's why so many people feel anxious, sleepless, or carry chronic tension, even when they say, "I don't think anything's wrong with me." Repressed fear is like a ghost. It doesn't stand right in front of you, but it lingers in every choice you make. I once heard a client say, "I keep telling myself I'm not ready to write my first book. But really, I'm afraid people will see I'm not good enough. I'm afraid they'll see through me." See, that wasn't just an excuse, it was a silent fear shaping his actions. I met another man, a very successful entrepreneur. On the outside, everyone saw strength, control, confidence, but after many sessions, he finally admitted, all that control was armor. Inside, he carried a fear of being powerless, one born from a chaotic childhood. He had repressed that fear for years, and it turned into a habit of controlling everything. What looked like power was actually the mask of fear. And here's what I want you to remember. Repression is not weakness. It's protection, especially when you were young and didn't have the tools to deal with pain. A child afraid of being abandoned might bury that fear just to survive in a difficult home. But the problem is, as adults, that old system keeps running, even when you don't need it anymore. And so the paradox is this. What once saved you may now be the chain that holds you back. That's why we need to start recognizing the fears we've buried. So ask yourself, why do you hesitate when opportunity comes? Why do you avoid a relationship? Or make excuses not to start what you really want? Maybe behind all of that, there's a fear you've never named. Repressed fear isn't an enemy. It's a signal. It points to something deeply important. If you fear failure, it means you care about growth. If you fear loss, it means you value love. If you fear abandonment, it means you deeply long to belong. So pause for a moment and think. What in your life are you still avoiding? A conversation you've never dared to have? A decision you've put off year after year? A dream you've left in a drawer, waiting for the right time? What if those things aren't just procrastination, but footprints of a hidden fear? Believe me, I've sat across from hundreds of people, students, artists, CEOs, and they all had a locked room in their minds. The difference is, some choose to avoid it forever while others slowly, courageously open the door, and the moment they start, their lives begin to change. So today, I want to invite you to take just one small step. Don't rush. Don't dig through every old wound. Simply observe the present. The next time you hesitate, the next time you make an excuse, ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? And just by naming it, you'll begin to take away its power. Have you ever wondered why sometimes your body feels tense, but your mind can't explain why? You sit down to work, and suddenly your heart beats faster than usual. You lie in bed, but there's this strange, nameless tightness running through you. You tell yourself, "I'm fine, nothing's wrong," but your body whispers back, "No, something is wrong." This is when we realize a deeper truth. Repressed fear doesn't just live in the mind. It leaves its mark on the body. I've met so many clients in therapy who came in with insomnia, stomach pain, or sudden panic attacks, and when we dug deeper, we found the root wasn't just medical. It was a fear that had been buried for years. Take one man in his 30s. For example, he once told me, "I don't know why I keep exploding at my wife and kids. I love them, but the smallest things set me off." After many sessions, he realized why. As a child, he grew up in a home filled with tension, where yelling could erupt at any moment. The little boy he once was had learned to bury his fear just to survive. But 20 years later, that same repressed fear spoke for him through his anger. The body remembers everything, even when the mind tries to forget. Research in neuropsychology shows that traumatic or fearful experiences can be etched into the nervous system, especially in the amygdala, the brain's emotional center. Put simply, your body is like a biological journal. Every emotion you never released is still written there, waiting. And here's the paradox: the more you avoid fear, the stronger it becomes. Think of it like trying to push a ball underwater. The harder you push, the more forcefully it bounces back up. Repressed fears work the same way. They rise to the surface as tension, irritability, or subtle self-sabotage in your work and relationships. I know, facing fear isn't easy. Maybe you've wondered, if I open it up, will I fall apart? My answer, after years of working with adults, is this: you won't fall apart, you'll find freedom. The real collapse only happens when we keep repressing forever. Let me give you a picture. Imagine walking down a narrow path, with tall walls on both sides. Each wall is a fear you've repressed: fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of not being good enough. The further you walk, the tighter the walls press in, until it's hard to breathe. Then one day, you stop, you place your hand on one wall, and in that moment, you discover it's not as solid as you thought. With a little courage, you can step through and see the wide open sky waiting on the other side. Have you ever felt that moment? When you finally faced something you'd been afraid of your whole life, and then suddenly realized it wasn't nearly as terrifying as you imagined. It's like telling a secret you've carried for years. The instant it leaves your lips, you feel lighter, almost shockingly so. And this is the truth I want you to carry. Repressed fear isn't your enemy. It's a teacher. It shows you where healing is needed, where growth is possible, and often, behind that fear lies something precious. You fear failure because you value growth. You fear losing someone because love runs deep in you. If you learn to listen, every fear carries a message about what your heart treasures most. So, how do we begin the healing process? I won't tell you it's quick, but I will tell you, it's worth it. And even the very first step, simply naming your fear, daring to look at it, can be a powerful transformation. In the next part, I'll share some practical methods, grounded in science but also deeply human, that will help you gently touch your own fears instead of running from them. Because you deserve to live a life that's free, not chained down by the ghosts of your past. One of the most powerful moments I've ever witnessed in therapy is the exact second someone finally names their real fear. Usually, before that, they'll say things like, "I'm stressed about work," or, "I'm sad because my partner left me." But when we dig deeper, there comes a pause, and then, in a whisper, they say, "I'm afraid no one really needs me." That moment is fragile, but it's also deeply powerful, because only when light is shined on the darkness does it begin to fade. I want you to think about yourself for a second. Have you ever stopped and asked, "What am I truly afraid of?" Not the surface level worries, but the deeper fear you usually avoid? Sometimes, the first step toward healing isn't about changing your life right away. The first step is simply naming it. Imagine a crying child standing in front of you. You'd never say, "Stop crying. There's nothing wrong." Instead, you'd sit down, put a hand on their shoulder, and ask, "What are you scared of?" In the same way, you can learn to sit with yourself and gently ask, What am I afraid of? Science backs this up. Studies on exposure therapy show that just labeling an emotion lowers the body's stress response. Instead of saying, "I'm anxious," try being more specific. "I'm afraid of being judged," or "I'm afraid of being left alone." Your body reacts differently when the truth is spoken. But naming it isn't enough. You also need to practice staying with the fear for a little while. I know that sounds intimidating, but trust me, when you sit with it, you often realize, oh, it's not as terrifying as I thought. It's like standing in the dark for a moment until your eyes adjust. And then noticing a small light shining somewhere. I often give my clients a simple exercise. Whenever you feel tense or anxious for no clear reason, pause for 2 minutes, take a slow breath, and instead of pushing it away, whisper to yourself, "I see this fear. I acknowledge it." You might be surprised to notice that just acknowledging it cuts the tension in half. Have you ever tried that? Just 2 minutes, no journal, no ritual, just a little courage to stay present. The second thing I want you to remember is self-compassion. When people think about healing, they often think of discipline. I need to be stronger. I need to control myself better. But that approach usually makes things worse. Because fear is born in moments when you didn't feel safe, when you didn't feel loved. If you respond to yourself with harshness, you only reinforce that cycle. I once had a client, a woman around 28. She constantly criticized herself for being anxious, for crying too much, for not being as strong as others. But when she began practicing self-compassion, placing a hand on her chest and saying, "It's okay, I'm learning how to live," something shifted. The anxiety didn't vanish overnight, but it became less overwhelming. It felt like a passing shower instead of a never-ending storm. You can try this too. Instead of blaming yourself for your fears, ask, "If my best friend were going through this, what would I say to comfort them?" Then say those exact words to yourself. I know, it sounds simple, but it's hard in practice. Still, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be patient. Because healing repressed fear is a long journey, not a shortcut. And I want you to remember this. No two journeys are the same. Some people need professional therapy. Others find healing through meditation, art, or simply an honest conversation with a close friend. What matters isn't how fast you move, it's that you're willing to take a step. In the next part, I'll share a different perspective, how repressed fears, if you learn to listen to them, can actually become opportunities for growth. Because sometimes, the very thing that makes you tremble is also what can guide you toward a stronger, freer version of yourself. There's something I often tell my clients. Behind every fear, there's always a hidden value waiting to be discovered. You fear failure because you truly value growth. You fear losing someone because your love is so real. You fear abandonment because, deep down, you long for connection. I remember working with a 24-year-old young man. He was a strong student with a scholarship, but he constantly procrastinated and avoided new challenges. When I asked, "What scares you the most?" he answered right away, "I'm afraid of failing." But when I pressed further and asked, "If you weren't afraid of failure, what would really matter to you?" he broke down in tears. "I just want my family to be proud of me." Do you see? Sometimes fear isn't a sign of weakness at all. It's a reminder that in your heart lies something precious. And if you learn to walk through the fear, you'll touch that sacred part of yourself. Imagine this. You're standing in front of an old wooden door. The word, fear, is carved into it. Your hand trembles as you reach for the handle. But when you finally open it, instead of darkness, you find a room filled with light. Inside is what you truly long for: love, connection, growth, freedom. Maybe you've been standing outside that door for years, assuming it would only lead to pain. But the truth is, it's always been leading you back to your own heart. Science has a term for this too. In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, it's called reframing. Instead of seeing fear as an obstacle, you begin to see it as a signpost. It points you toward what matters most, so important, in fact, that it makes you tremble. I want you to pause and ask yourself a small but powerful question. If I were no longer afraid of this, how much bigger could my life become? Think about your career, your relationships, or even a dream you once set aside. If the fear dissolved, how differently would you live? One of my favorite answers came from a woman in her 40s. She said, "If I weren't afraid of rejection, I dare to love again. Just that one sentence told me her heart was still alive and vibrant. And maybe, just like her, there's a part of you that's been waiting for years, to be freed from fear. To live fully, to love fully, to step beyond the safety zone. Have you ever considered that fear itself might be a gift? I know it sounds paradoxical. But think about it. If you weren't afraid of losing anything, would you truly appreciate what you have? Because you fear loss, you love more deeply. Because you fear failure, you give your very best. When you face it directly, fear can actually become fuel. In my years of working with people, from entrepreneurs to artists to everyday individuals, I've noticed one truth. Adults aren't the ones without fear. Adults are the ones who keep moving forward while still afraid. And in that moment when they choose to step forward anyway, an entirely new life opens up. As you listen to me now, maybe a very personal fear has come to mind. Fear of loneliness. Fear of losing your job. Fear of being left behind. Hold on to that for a moment. Because in the next part, I'll share with you some practical ways to transform that fear into opportunity, not just to heal, but to grow, to find freedom, and to create a life you truly long for. Because sometimes, the very fear you've been fighting against is actually the key that unlocks your freedom. You know, throughout this journey, we've talked a lot about fear, especially the kind of fear that gets buried deep inside. We've seen how it quietly shapes our habits, our choices, even the dreams we've left behind. But I want you to remember this. Fear is not a life sentence. Fear is an invitation. Sometimes we think courage means being strong, pushing fear away, becoming someone who feels no fear. But the truth is much simpler. Courage is recognizing that you're afraid, and still choosing to take the next step. I want you to imagine this moment, tonight, when you turn off the lights and sit in silence. No noise, no distractions, no social media to keep you busy. Just you and your breath. If you listen closely, you might feel the echo of an old fear. It might whisper, "I'm still here. I never really left." And instead of running, like you may have before, I want you to try something different. Whisper back, "I see you. I hear you. I know you're just trying to protect me." You don't need to fight it. You don't need to push it away. Just acknowledge it, and you'll be surprised. Sometimes, even a gentle nod toward your fear is enough to take away half its power. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that when we name an emotion, the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes fear, calms down. In other words, acknowledging fear is already a step toward healing. I want you to remember that the next time your heart races, your hands shake, or you find yourself avoiding something that matters to you. Let me tell you a short story. I once worked with a woman in her 30s. She was completely burned out in her old job but terrified of change. She kept saying she was afraid of failure, afraid of judgment, but when we looked deeper, her fear wasn't about work at all. It started in childhood, when she felt like she was never good enough in her parents' eyes. She carried that fear into adulthood. But the moment she dared to name it, to face it, something shifted. She finally applied for her dream job. And you know what? She got it, not because she stopped being afraid, but because she stopped letting fear make her decisions for her. I believe every one of us has a story like that. Maybe it's a love you've never confessed. Maybe it's a project you've postponed for years. Maybe it's a dream you tucked away because of fear. And maybe today is the day you decide to go back and open that door. Remember this. Fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And because you're human, you get to choose how you walk with it. You don't need to fix it completely to live a meaningful life. You just need the courage to take one small step, with fear by your side. So tonight, ask yourself this question. If tomorrow I stopped running from this fear, what's the very first thing I would do? Maybe it's a phone call you've been putting off. Maybe it's an email you've been too scared to send. Maybe it's 3 simple words, "I love you." Start with just one small action, because that small action can change everything. And when you do it, I promise, you'll realize you're stronger than you ever thought. As we close today, I want to leave you with this. Repressed fear is not a permanent prison. It's a mirror reflecting what you love, what you value, and what you long for most. And when you're gentle enough to look into it, patient enough to listen to it, you'll discover not only healing, but also the path back home to yourself. So the next time fear shows up, don't run. Try smiling at it and saying, "Welcome." Thank you for reminding me what really matters. And maybe, that's the very moment a new chapter begins for you. A chapter of freedom, growth, and living more fully than ever before. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it too. And remember, you are not alone. All of us are learning how to walk with fear, and that, in itself, is the beautiful part of being human.